Nobody warns you about the version of yourself you become. They warn you about the narcissist. They tell you to watch out for the manipulation, the mood swings, the silent treatments, the way they make everything about them. But nobody sits you down and says, listen, the most devastating thing that is going to happen in this relationship is not what they do to you. It is what you slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly do to yourself in order to survive them. That is the part that stays. That is the part that follows you out the door long after they are gone, long after you have blocked their number, long after you have convinced yourself you are finally healing. The truth is, loving a narcissist does not just break your heart, it rewires it. And understanding exactly how that rewiring happens is the first step toward reversing it. Here is what nobody talks about. The transformation does not begin with a dramatic moment. There is no single conversation, no one fight, no obvious turning point you can point to and say, that is where I lost myself. It happens in the smallest increments imaginable. It happens the first time you soften your tone because you sense their mood shifting. It happens when you edit a sentence before it leaves your mouth because you already know how they will react. It happens when you stop sharing good news because somehow in a relationship that is supposed to celebrate you, your joy always ends up feeling inconvenient. You do not notice any of this in the moment. You think you are being considerate. You think you are being emotionally mature. You think you are doing what love requires. But what you are actually doing is beginning the slow process of disappearing. Psychologists call this self-abandonment, but that clinical term does not quite capture how it feels from the inside. From the inside, it feels like responsibility. It feels like patience. It feels at times like the most loving thing you have ever done. You are keeping the peace. You are being the bigger person. You are choosing the relationship over your ego. Except you are not choosing the relationship over your ego. You are choosing their comfort over your reality. And you do it so many times in such small doses that by the time you realize what has happened, you can't even remember what your reality used to feel like. This is the first way loving a narcissist changes you forever. Not through cruelty alone, though there is cruelty. Not through the arguments or the betrayals or the emotional withdrawal. You are choosing their comfort over your reality. And you do it so many times in such small doses that by the time you realize what has happened, you cannot even remember what your reality used to feel like. This is the first way loving a narcissist changes you forever. Not through cruelty alone, though there is cruelty. Not through the arguments or the betrayals or the emotional withdrawal. It changes you through the adaptation, through the intelligent, resourceful, entirely understandable process by which your nervous system learns to prioritize their emotional state above your own. Dr. Gabor Mate has spent decades studying how early experiences of conditional love shape our attachment patterns, and what he consistently finds is this: when love feels like it must be earned, the self pays the price. You do not lose yourself because you are weak. You lose yourself because you are wired for connection, and connection in this relationship came with conditions. Now here is the contrast that most people miss entirely. This adaptation, this slow erosion of self, it does not feel like erosion while it is happening. It feels like growth. It feels like you are becoming more emotionally intelligent, more self-aware, more capable of managing conflict. You are learning to regulate yourself, to not react, to hold space. And in another context, with another person, those would be genuine strengths. But inside a narcissistic dynamic, those same capacities are being harvested. Your emotional intelligence becomes a tool for managing someone who will never manage themselves. Your self-regulation becomes a mechanism for absorbing behavior that should never be tolerated. Your patience becomes the very thing that allows the pattern to continue. What makes this so difficult to see in real time is that narcissists are not always cruel. That is perhaps the most misunderstood truth about these relationships. The cruelty is intermittent. It is sandwiched between moments of extraordinary warmth, connection, and intimacy that feel more real than anything you have ever experienced. This is not accidental. The inconsistency itself is the mechanism. When love is unpredictable, when warmth can vanish without warning and return just as suddenly, the nervous system does not learn to detach, it learns to chase. It becomes hypervigilant, scanning constantly for signs of which version of this person is coming today. And in that state of constant scanning, something profound happens. You stop living inside your own experience, and start living inside theirs. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about what it costs a person to spend months, sometimes years, with their primary attention directed not inward at what they feel, what they need, what they want, but outward at someone else's moods, signals, and reactions. The self does not disappear overnight, but it does go quiet. It learns that its own signals are secondary. It learns that its emotions are not the priority in this space. And eventually, it stops sending signals as loudly, because loud signals create conflict, and conflict feels dangerous, and danger and an attachment relationship feels like the threat of losing everything. This is not a personality flaw.
This is biology responding to environment, and recognizing it as such is the beginning of something important. Not just healing in the abstract sense, but a specific, radical, and deeply personal act of reclamation. Because the self that went quiet did not disappear, it adapted. It compressed itself into a shape that felt safer. And compressed things, when given the right conditions, can expand again. That is what this video is about. Not just the damage, not just the diagnosis, but the full, honest, unflinching picture of how loving a narcissist changes you, why it changes you in the ways that it does, and what it actually looks like to come back to yourself on the other side. Not the version of you that existed before, because that person did not yet know what you now know, but the version of you that is possible after, the one who is harder to fool, clearer in their boundaries, and finally free. There is a particular kind of grief that nobody prepares you for when you leave a narcissistic relationship. It is not the grief of missing them, though that exists too, confusingly, painfully, in ways that make you question your own sanity. It is the grief of looking in the mirror sometime after the relationship ends and not quite recognizing the person looking back. Not because you look different, but because you feel different, hollowed out in places that used to feel full, uncertain in ways you never used to be, quieter, smaller, more careful. And the most disorienting part is that you cannot pinpoint exactly when it happened, this becoming someone slightly less than yourself. You just know that somewhere between the beginning and the end, something essential got lost, and you're not even sure you know how to find it again. This is identity erosion, and it is one of the most underreported consequences of narcissistic relationships, precisely because it does not look like damage from the outside.